The hollow bell. The road to silence. The first thing Elizabeth noticed when she entered the village of Myrorod wasn't the silence. It was the absence of birds. No chirps, no rustling wings. Just wind weaving through skeletal trees that lined the crumbling road like mourners at a funeral. She cut the engine and stepped out of her old sedan, camera slung over one shoulder, notebook in the other. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and wet stone. Fog clung low to the ground, curling like fingers around the broken fence posts and moss-covered signs. The village wasn't on any map. A professor at her university had mentioned it in passing, an offhand comment over stale coffee and too many lecture notes. "There's a bell that still rings every night in Myrorod," he said, "but they took the bells down 50 years ago." Elizabeth was a journalist, yes, but not the kind who covered elections or interviewed celebrities. She chased old things, forgotten things, haunted things. She walked slowly, her boots crunching gravel. The houses she passed leaned like drunkards, roofs sagging, windows like blank eyes. Each one was shuttered, but not empty. That was the strangest part. She could feel the presence behind those walls, something watching, something waiting. At the center of the village, just as she'd been told, stood a church. Its spire rose like a splinter against the gray sky, but the bell tower was silent, open and empty. The doors were sealed with thick chains, rusted and tight, and still, every night, the bell rang. Her room was in an abandoned schoolhouse turned temporary lodging for visiting researchers, though none had come in over a decade. She was alone here. The owner had left the key under a stone. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, just an old wood stove and dust. At 11:58 p.m., Elizabeth turned on her recorder and waited. Midnight. The sound didn't come from the church. It came from everywhere. A deep, resonant gong vibrated through the floorboards. A second, softer chime followed, and then a third, distant, hollow, as though echoing through something vast and underground. She held her breath, and then she heard it. A voice. Not a whisper, not a word, but something below speech. A groan of earth and stone and memory. She didn't sleep that night. Beneath the altar, Elizabeth couldn't shake the sound. The bell didn't echo like a church bell. It reverberated inside her, in her ribcage, her teeth, her bones. The next morning, she walked to the church. The chains on the doors were older than she thought, covered in sigils carved into the rust. They weren't just for keeping people out. They were to keep something in. She circled around back and found what looked like a collapsed crypt, overgrown, half-buried. With effort, she moved some of the rubble and discovered a narrow stone staircase leading down beneath the altar. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, she found a room, small, round, with walls scorched black. Symbols were scratched into the floor. A stone bell sat in the center. It was cracked, and it was bleeding. A thin trickle of something red, not quite blood, not quite wax, seeped from the split in the bell's side. Elizabeth backed away slowly, her breath clouding in the freezing air. She turned to leave and heard a footstep behind her. "He who stands behind." Elizabeth spun, flashlight trembling in her grip, but no one was there. The crypt was empty, silent, except for the drip, drip from the cracked bell. The red fluid pooled at the base, steaming slightly despite the cold. She fled the tunnel, scrambled up the stone stairs, and didn't stop running until she was back in her room. That night, the bell sounded again, louder. And this time, someone knocked on her door at 12:03 a.m. 3 times. Slow, deliberate. She didn't open it. In the morning, she checked the door. No footprints, no signs of life. But there was a handprint on the inside of the glass. She began asking around. At the old well near the square, she found a woman, ancient, blind, sitting on a crate and muttering. "You shouldn't be here," the woman whispered without looking. "The bell doesn't toll for the living." Elizabeth crouched down, notebook in hand. "What does it toll for, then?" she asked. The woman's mouth twisted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "For those taken beneath." That night, Elizabeth dreamed of the bell again, but not the one beneath the church, a much older one, hanging between dead trees, made of bone. And in the dream, something rang it. A tall figure cloaked in ash and bark with no face, only a black void where the eyes should be. And as it turned to her, she heard her name whispered inside her mind. "Elizabeth!" She woke up screaming. The forest remembers. Elizabeth packed her bags before dawn. She didn't care about the story anymore. Something was wrong here, deeply wrong. She needed to get out. The road, however, was gone. Where gravel had once been, now stood trees. Thick, ancient pines she hadn't seen before, their roots tearing through asphalt like paper. Her car still sat where she left it, but beyond it, only forest. She tried to walk, compass in hand, sun at her back. By noon, she realized the sun no longer moved. Every path she took led her back to the village. The people were still there, watching from shuttered windows, silent, faces barely visible behind curtains. She knocked, she pleaded, but no one opened the door, except one. A boy, no older than 8, stood in front of a wooden house, clutching a piece of cloth. His eyes were wide, glassy. He said only one thing. "You heard the bell. That means he sees you now." "Who?" she whispered. But the boy had already turned and walked back inside. That night, she heard the bell again. Only this time, it didn't chime. It cried. A low, drawn-out wail that sent the birds fleeing from the trees. A sound that vibrated the glass in her window. She covered her ears, but the sound was inside her. Inside her bones, behind her. When she turned around, the shadow was there, tall, rooted like a tree, with eyes of black flame. And it whispered, 3 nights. The one who serves. Elizabeth no longer questioned the days, only the nights. The second night came like a sickness. Heavy air, breathing walls. The sound of the bell now rang in her chest like a second heartbeat. She returned to the church, this time with a candle and a knife, not for protection, for understanding. Deep in the crypt, she found a journal. The cover was leather, and the ink smelled of rust and rot. On the cover was a name, Father Hilarion, 1893. She opened the book. "We made a pact," he wrote. "The forest takes one, and we spare 13 years. The bell is his mouth. The sound is his bell." She read on. "The first victim was the blacksmith's son, the second is his own wife." Elizabeth's hands were shaking. "On the third night, whoever hears the bell must answer. If not, it comes for all of us." Suddenly she understood. They weren't just afraid. They were waiting. When she returned to the central square, the entire village was already waiting for her. People stood in a circle, eyes blank, lips closed, and in the center stood a new bell, not stone, but freshly cast, still steaming. A thick rope hung down. The blind woman from the well came up to her. "You have been chosen," she said. "Ring the bell. Offer yourself. Otherwise, he will take us all." Elizabeth shook her head. "This is madness." The blind woman grabbed her wrist. "You were the first outsider to hear this and stay. That makes you an echo. That makes you a victim. The bell must toll." Elizabeth ran, not because she was weak, but because she finally understood. There was no choice, no mercy, no escape, only the bell's will. She ran into the forest, where the sunlight did not touch the ground. Branches grabbed her hair and clothes. Voices whispered in her ears. Somewhere behind her, something large was following. Finally, her flashlight went out. Her breath was visible in the air, though it was not cold. And then she came upon a clearing, and saw him. Not in the shadows, not in a dream, but for real. Tall, covered in bark that moved like skin. His face was a mask of rotten branches and moss, and behind the empty eyes, something red was blazing. His voice was not a sound, but a vibration in the brain. "You broke the silence. You entered the circle. You heard the call. Now you must toll." He stretched out his hand, a branchy, bony one. In his palm he held a bell, black, breathing. Its surface pulsed as if it were alive. 3 rings, one for the forgotten, one for the remembered, one for yourself, Elizabeth screamed and ran, but the forest only turned her back. Back to the village, back to the square, back to the bell. Now all the villagers stood in a circle, their heads bowed, and the blind woman, weeping, whispered, "Forgive us." And then they all knelt down. The final toll. Elizabeth stood beneath the hollow bell. The villagers knelt around her, silent, broken, as if mourning something already lost. Not one of them looked her in the eye. Not even the children. Above her, the bell swayed gently in a wind she couldn't feel. The sky itself seemed to crack, not with thunder, but with a deep, splitting sound, like ancient wood tearing apart. The forest breathed in. She reached out. Her fingers touched the thick rope. The bell vibrated even before she pulled, as if it craved it. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded in her ears. One for the forgotten. She pulled the rope. A gong. The sound cut through the earth, the sky, her bones. Birds were falling from the trees. An ancient, endless cry rose from the shadows, as if the earth itself were screaming. One for the remembered. She pulled again. This time the rope weighed like lead. The church trembled. Cracks crept through the foundation. The villagers began to hum, low, harmonious, terrible. Tears streamed down her face. One for yourself. Elizabeth let go of the rope. She turned, and there he stood, not in a dream, not in a shadow, but in reality, in her eyes, in her veins, in her last breath. "You won't take me," she whispered. But he didn't need to take her. Elizabeth opened her mouth, and the bell rang. No hands, no rope, no movement. Her voice, empty, distorted, became a bell. Epilogue. The next day, a new traveler entered the forest. He found neither a village nor a church. But at exactly midnight, he heard the bell ring, and far away among the trees, he heard a woman's whisper, 3 nights.